Oh, right.
We'll start where I stopped.
All right. Again,
Take
I
two.
apologize for my mistake before. Alex handled it very well there, and I enjoyed his presentation. We were talking about revenue forecasting before. And one of the key things that an airline does is revenue management. And you need to know who's going to show up, when, and how much they're going to pay. Bara, in this sort of environment, how do you do RM?
Look, I think as we were speaking, we kindly stopped, but thank you for that. We actually were able to introduce ourselves and swap cards and QR codes. Look, I think we're in an unusual world. I think my fellow panelists will also agree with us. We are seeing incredible yield, only because some of the markets are just waking up. Singapore woke up behind Australia, and we have another investment in Jetstar Japan as well, and that's just waking up. And when markets wake up, and when documentation and the friction is removed in certain markets on COVID testing or PCR testing, yields have actually shot up. And we sold anything and everything at very high yields. People just wanted to travel. So we are actually in a space right now where they call it the revenge of leisure markets and leisure travel. We've seen some phenomenal returns in the Qantas and Jetstar group. I talked about first half results, and Qantas has seen that in the premium and premium leisure market and the business market, even having load factors of 94% to London. And at the price-sensitive end where we are seeing some phenomenal load factors and yields, and to the point that we've actually sold close to 4.4 million tickets below $100. And that's a certain portion of our capacity we put in across Japan, Australia, New Zealand, and Singapore. And we aim to do close to 10 million tickets at $100 and beyond, while Qantas is seeing some phenomenal results at the upper end of the segments. So when it comes to revenue management, obviously, each market is very different. And when you start, we were just talking about when will this so-called phenomena of high yields of fares taper off. Many are saying it's end of this year. Some are saying it's 18 or 24 months. We don't have a crystal ball, but I think we all are quite prudent and in terms of our balance sheet management and capital management. And you really, after coming out of 2 to 3 years of losses, you really want to be pragmatic on how you sell and how you revenue manage and cost manage at the same time. And each market is very different. I can also give you the example of, we are just about to go into China from Singapore into a market called Haikou. And we are looking at the direct point of connectivity from Haikou to Singapore. It's actually an under 4-hour market, but now the Chinese travelers or the traveler in Southeast Asia have to connect 15 hours to a secondary point in China to get here. And fares are $2,000 to 3,000 Singapore dollars. Pre-COVID, it was like $500 return. You tell me how you revenue manage. So we have to basically go to the drawing board for each market, take a pragmatic view of where the market was pre-COVID, where the market is now, look at the product proposition that we are going to put into the market from a direct product versus an indirect product, and then manage revenue. But it's all different. There is no one formula.
Do you just live in this sort of constant fear that you're going to sell out the flight too soon? Are you one of those people?
Actually, it's a good point. In any airline, it's good to have this positive debate between the finance guys, the capital guys, and the network and commercial guys. And in certain markets, we've noticed this in, for example, Indonesia from Singapore. Singapore, Jakarta is one of the largest markets in the world. And at the moment, it's artificially constrained in terms of slots and flights compared to pre-COVID as well as you have it now. One, because carriers have actually taken out capacity and shrunk. Jetstar Asia shrunk as well. Likewise, other carriers in the Indonesian market have actually equally shrunk. And so in this dimension, it's very interesting, right? Fares will find their normalization at a certain point in time, but everything is selling out, and it's selling out fast. And the behavior is quite unusual in the booking curve. In the price-sensitive end, we could go 90 days or 180 days, depending on scheduled seasons. But right now, we actually don't need to sell too far too soon. And you want to be guarded in terms of doing it because you're just feeling your way into the so-called pricing curve. But we've seen some phenomenal success in our markets, but every market is different.
Mike, how are you guys handling
Well,
that?
no, I mean, Barra touched on it. I think the single biggest factor in all of this, which has driven yields up, particularly in international markets and particularly on long haul, it's the biggest single factor. And people talk about revenge travel. There is some of that. No, but this is a capacity story, right? There isn't, in certain markets, there just isn't the capacity back anywhere near or to the levels that it was pre-COVID. And by the way, the world has grown. World GDP is higher than it was 2019. And we always used to say that air travel grew as, GDP plus a bit, right? So, the world is producing more than it was in 2019, and air travel is actually below where it was in 2019 on an aggregate basis. Now, you're seeing it more distorted in some markets than others. I mean, Qantas in Australia are seeing the most, astonishing performance. I think in our markets, we've only more recently returned to profitability. I mean, we had a situation in domestic Philippines last year where actually we were pushing all of our capacity into the domestic market because we couldn't fly it into the international markets. So what happened is the capacity was 110, 120% above where it was in 2019. So in actual fact, yields and load factors were slightly off. On the international markets that were open, we were able to access those. Yields were very high. Some of the loads weren't because the markets weren't fully open. Now we're starting to see the normalization. And because of the capacity changes, domestic capacity will start to drop, actually, from where it was last year. So domestic yields and load factors will come up. But you'll see international yields, which have been extraordinarily high, they will start to normalize. Now, how this plays out, this normalization, is going to take some time, and it will vary by market. And as Richard was mentioning when we were chatting off stage, it will, going back to a question on OEMs, it's going to be, where's all these aircraft coming from? There are delays. How quickly will this capacity get restored? Now, it will happen at some point. Now, whether it's 12 months, 18 months, there will be a normalization. I think the question for airline boards and airline executives is, because this is a long-term gig, right? It's a long-term game, and you have to invest with a very long lens. Woe betide anyone who starts ordering 350s, 777s, or anything else, basing it on their long-haul yields that they get now. It will be plain bonkers, all right? And by the time that aircraft delivers, they will be at just the wrong side of the cycle because the capacity will come online and yields will drop. So that's where I think airline executives and boards have to be very responsible on this. Enjoy the moment. I think Bara was clearly enjoying the moment there as he was describing it. I think let's enjoy the moment, but be responsible as we go forward. We've seen in this industry, and particularly in this region, a lot of airlines that have just plain over-ordered, right? They absolutely over-ordered, and forget about COVID. There were a number of airlines that were going to go into desperate problems, even without COVID, because they'd ordered X hundred aircraft where they didn't have anywhere to fly them, let alone an ability to finance them. So I think we just need to be responsible, enjoy the moment, and be responsible about how we look at capacity going forward. Saying that, be opportunistic. I announced earlier on where we're going to grow at double digits this year now. We've accelerated some aircraft through. And maybe we'll do that this year, maybe we'll be double digits next year. But I think at some point in time, we'll get back to our steady as she goes, 5-6%, let's keep going at that rate. So that's kind of but capacity is everything. That's the real factor that's playing into this whole market, plus a bit of revenge travel.
All right. So there are several airlines in the region that have been restructured during COVID. Spoke to one earlier, Thai Airways, Garda, Indonesia, Philippine Airlines, and others. I mean, do you think that these airlines are they finally back on track? Is this the time, or you think they're going to go back to their old ways?
Well, no, I think PAL did a very, very good restructuring. I mean, let's be clear. I mean, they got a fantastic haircut from their creditors, of the order of about $2 billion, which is great, and I think they've restructured the business to a certain extent. But they've certainly benefited by the story around capacity. And I think what they've got to do is make sure that they take a long-term view about what's going to happen on the West Coast, for example. Now, whether it's going to be 12 months, 18 months before all of the Sixth Freedom capacity returns between, say, Manila and Los Angeles, Manila, San Francisco, Vancouver, etc. That's where they've got to look with a long-term lens, rather than suddenly saying, hey, isn't life brilliant? Look, we can get these yields on Trans-Pacific. Because it won't last. But look, they're doing a very good job now, and hats off to them, I think. But they probably had, I mean, a strange situation for probably well, not just recent times, but for a long time. PAL made very good money last year, probably their most profitable year they've ever had. We lost money on a yearly basis. So I think they've done a good job. I don't know so much about Thai. I was chatting to their CEO earlier on. I think they've got a very realistic view about what they're trying to do, and their things are improving. But I think everyone's got to look through what I think is some real kind of, the market isn't normal at this point in time. It is not sustainable. And at some point it will normalize. So I think everyone's got to be looking, if they're making long-term investments, they've got to be looking at that normalization situation rather than, hey, isn't it great now? This is how it's going to be in 24 months, because it won't.
Richard, do you see that your competitors are acting rationally?
So, I mean, it's interesting. I mean, we're all talking the same stuff, and I would, agree with everything that's been said, and we're seeing the same stuff. When you look at people acting irrationally, I think it's very difficult to act irrationally at the moment because you can't get the capacity. I mean, I was in the US 20 years ago, actually in the freighter business. And the thing about the US then was that in the history of aviation, the big carriers had always lost money. They'd had 100 years of a loss-making business. And the last sort of 15, 20 years, whatever it is, the last 15 years, they've made money. And exactly as Mike said, at that time you went through the consolidations, you limited it to 3 sort of big aircraft groupings, plus a couple of LCCs, and the capacity discipline has been there. So I completely agree with this capacity story. But when you look close to us, so the big country close to us is India. So, the big news obviously is Tata. And, we've just had the biggest aircraft order ever, I think, 470 aircraft. But, you put that in perspective, it's taking these guys 8 years to get those aircraft. India has a population that is 63 times bigger than Sri Lanka. We're just over 20 million. So if I divide 470 by 63, that means I'm going to get 7.5 aircraft in the next 8 years, including the ones that I've got leaving. And by the way, Air India have some old aircraft. So I don't think there's any irrationality there yet. And I think that, we're going to be kept honest by lack of available fleet. And I think the only question we have is how long do these strange times happen? And it will vary by market. I think we're all agreed on that. But I agree, long-term capacity is really important to all of us in keeping this industry in the black.
All right, so capacity is important, but you talked about, the magic word in the United States and in Europe, consolidation. We haven't seen that much here for all kinds of reasons. Is the market just going to behave differently as a result?
It's a big question and one that's been going on a long time. I think, the reality is that the US is one country. It's a continent, but it's one country. And aviation is still driven by national interests and traffic rights and things like that. And some of it makes good sense because, if you're a small country, your airline is really important to the economy. So if, Philippine Airlines or Thai or Sri Lankan disappear in the next 3 or 4 months, nobody's going to be able to replace that capacity short term. Sure, long term they will, but not short term. So national interest makes some level of sense. But there are different ways that people are trying to work around that. I mean, you're probably much better to talk to this than I am. I mean, you've got multiple Jetstars in different jurisdictions. So there's different ways that people are trying to handle this.
Look, I think in the consolidation space, if it's not already happening, it's happening in a very soft way. I think if you look at the Tata Singapore Airlines / Vistara, Air India Express, Air Asia India, then you have it there. That's one form of consolidation, you can say. And then you have, in Latin Americas, you have got Avianca and Viva. Of course, that's getting a pushback. And then you have various modes. You have the simple sales and marketing collaboration. I think you've seen it here between Singapore Airlines and Garuda, Singapore Airlines and Malaysian. And then you have got the other JVs that is happening. So in our world, in the Jetstar and the Qantas world, we keep a very distinct separation between the full-service carrier and the price-sensitive, low-cost, low-fare segment. Precisely, I think Mike brought about very good points. Low cost is in our DNA, and we play a function within the group space. Look, in Singapore, the population is 5.45, and the airport is 20x. And I think you've seen the plans for Terminal 5. That will take it to 30x. So where is this market coming from? I can tell you it's not coming from Singapore. And then how our group plays into this is that we have, from the Qantas group, the 380s, the 330s, from the Jetstar group, the 787s coming into Singapore, and then we have Jetstar Asia. We shrunk during COVID. We don't have a domestic market. We didn't have a domestic market. We parked all our aircraft in Singapore, and we shrunk and we pivoted metal into where the markets mattered and into the iron ore mining business in Western Australia, and we did very well, right? And now we are growing again. Albeit some will say a bit slowly, but I like to defer to what Mike said. We have to be very responsible to our shareholders, and we are doing it in the space and the constraints we have, which is aircraft at the moment. In our group, we have seen a 3 to 6 month deferment of deliveries from the OEMs. We are now going to take one new aircraft every 3 weeks for the next 3 years. We have 299, almost 300 aircrafts on order. We have 295 still on tap. If I take off the deliveries we've seen the first half of financial year 23, which ended in December for us. In the Jetstar world, we'll be taking 45 320neos, LRs and XLRs. They give us good 8,000 kilometer range. Different specs.
What are you going to do with all that range?
It's different specs and different configuration. We are, I like what it was spoken about earlier by Mike on stage, that when you use a wide body in a low-cost market, flying into certain segments, it's a tough game. It's a tough game. We tried that in Singapore, and we backed off from it. We had the 330s, 200 series here in Singapore in 2012 when I came back to Jetstar as CEO. We were quite smart about it, and then we flipped. We have a highly successful international business that flies Australia to Bali. We are the #1 carrier in Indonesia for international travel at the moment, thanks to Bali. I think all of you know Bali. And we have delivered 1.25 million customers in the space just in the last year, and we are looking at some phenomenal growth. We have got more than 140 flights into Indonesia. And so our long-haul, low-cost model operates into certain distinct segments that is underserved by full-service carriers, where you have a large leisure segment that warrants the kind of thick density you need, like Cebu has with the 330-900s in the Philippines. So we pick very distinct segments for this long-haul, low-cost market to serve. But what I want to pivot back is your question on the so-called different business models. The way we play with the Qantas hinterland in Singapore is, Qantas is at the moment very distinct on its full-service product. Jetstar is distinct. They're investing $100 million in lounges in Australia, in Hong Kong, and they have a fantastic lounge in Singapore. If you need to see it, first in business. What we do is when they carry customers into the hub, on what I've been telling you about the 5 million 20x traffic here, from Heathrow in Australia, we distribute that in the Southeast Asian market. We are very clear on our so-called core competencies within the group. At the price-sensitive end, we stay true to a low-cost DNA. We run a low-cost model and business, but we take on additional streams of traffic from the wider group. And we do that with Emirates. We do that with One World Partners. We have done that with Indigo now with Jetstar Connect with Dohop. You see a Dohop boat there. We do that throughout Southeast Asia. And we have KLM Air France, we have Finnair. In fact, on the onset of travel, when travel returned, we were kind of surprised when we opened the leisure markets, when the Southeast Asian travel segment was a little anxious on going to markets. We had a lot of European travelers coming to the Singapore hub on our flights into Bali or Phuket. And so we play a different distribution hub game in Singapore because we are positioned without a domestic market. And just like I think Richard was talking about the huge Indian subcontinent being next to Colombo. In Singapore, if you put a 4 to 5 hour radius, we hit the eastern border of India. We have Thailand. We have got Indochina. We have Indonesia, and we have China. So we sit in a very nice space, including Philippines as well. So we play a different market and with a different economics.
Thank you. Mike, a question for you. We've talked a little bit about changes in booking curves and revenue management. Has the way your consumer behaves, has that changed at all? Are they essentially doing the same things that they were doing in 2019? Or
Honestly, don't know.
You don't know? Okay.
It's so, no, it's very difficult at the minute. We're going through a transition, different markets, different sort of consumers, difficult to tell quite what's going on. The net output at the moment is the demand is strong, but how the booking curves vary by market, and it's very, very difficult to predict. But thankfully, the net outcome is on the positive. Yeah.
So the story in the US seems to be that almost any time an airline puts out for sale any ancillary item that is going to make the travel experience even this much better, people say, well, I've been cooped up at home for 2-3 years. I'm just going to buy it. I don't care what it costs. We know that people are paying the airfare, but are they paying extra for the ancillary as well?
Well, no, I think in the LCC space, you've got to be great at ancillaries. I think it's something that we've spent a lot of time on over the last few years, and I'm pleased to say that it's an area where our ancillary revenue our spend per pax has grown in excess of 20% since 2019, which is really the measure that you want, because you can sort of say, well, great that we've got demand, we've got high load factors or improved load factors, improved yield, but also we've got higher fuel costs, we've got FX issues as well, so every bit of revenue helps. So the ancillary for an LCC is a fundamental, it has to be a significant part of your overall revenue. If it's not a significant part of your overall revenue, then it's not, you're not doing the LCC gig right. So you've got to try doing, look, it's got to be meaningful, products that you're trying to put out there as well. Otherwise, you'll get found out. But generally, airlines have been doing well, and we've certainly been doing well on a couple of fronts. We've the core products, whether it's the bag and the seat and the meals, those always make up a substantial part, if not the majority, probably the majority of what you're getting. And then there's things on top like insurance, which is I think through the COVID scenario has actually helped reinforce the rationale in the consumer's mind for wanting to buy a relevant consumer product. So we're seeing insurance products. So that we're seeing healthy growth in that as well. But look, no, you've just got to be playing it. You've got to trial things. You've got to bundle them. You've got to do all these sort of clever stuff, which the technology now enables you to do. And yeah, you've just got to be stretching your ancillary team every month to say, right, what are you going to do next? And they're out there, so I'm telling them again. So there are.
Can you share a little secret with us in the audience here? How good is the margin on something like insurance? On insurance. Is it huge? Is it off the charts? Would I be nuts to buy insurance from you?
No, not at all.
No?
Not at all. The product's really relevant, and it's by the way, it's not expensive, right? I mean, a travel insurance is tiny. I mean, in absolute terms, in terms of the cost of a travel insurance. And certainly in the markets that we operate in, I mean, the average Filipino consumer is not going to go and spend, $50 on an insurance. That's not where they are. They want to pay something that really is representative for the segment for them. So it's a high value item in terms of what they receive, but at a very low cost. And it's in the booking flow. It's a natural thing for them to add on, and very relevant to exactly what their trip requirements are. So yeah, there's a margin on it. Of course there is.
Richard, what are you pushing your ancillary team to do? What do you want them to sell?
So, I mean, I think that it's, even in the legacy carriers, the ones that make the most money are the same things. It's baggage, it's seats. We probably don't do it quite as well. Well, certainly don't do it as well as the LCCs. It's a lower proportion of the fare when you're a full-service carrier. But the biggest challenges for us often with ancillaries are the legacy systems. So we have a higher proportion of people who buy through GDS, and it's not quite so easy to do fare families and bundling and unbundling using those systems, which means that then we don't tend to be quite as advanced in the other part of the skills of doing ancillaries. But it is very important, and we have increased our ancillary revenues by about 25% a passenger over the last 6 to 9 months, and I don't know whether that's good or bad, but at least it's an increase, and we're working on it.
That's very good.
So it's relevant. It's relevant to everybody. But it's that's where systems and trying to find ways around the legacy systems are quite important.
Bara, what's the highest margin item that you
Look,
sell?
I think it varies in markets and different markets and margins, but we are seeing anywhere between 25%, even north of 35% in some markets. And another thing I want to add a dimension is, look, our fellow panelists covered bags, seats. Insurance is actually very important now. People are realizing the importance of insurance throughout the recovery from COVID. The uncertainty, the anxiety of traveling to destinations and a family member getting COVID or some form of illness. I think COVID kind of like hastened the importance of insurance. Another interesting dimension is that in Jetstar we have Fly Safe and Fly Flexible, is bundling a flexible fare option. So I think that really spiked for us because customers were not only wanting to book a low fares ticket, but they also wanted the flexibility of changing date, changing name, changing schedule, just in case something happened and someone got COVID or any of the family members got COVID. We've seen that growth quite interestingly, and it's a product that we always had for SMEs. We're talking about business travel and leisure markets returning. We find a lot of SMEs are actually going to market for business, but they buy the flexible bundle. So we've seen a huge spike in bookings, and it is also it's the fulfillment of the ancillary product. I think a lot of customers are looking for a seamless solution. We're trying to roll out contactless payments on board. We're trying to make sure that the so-called you remove the friction between the crew and serving the customers in terms of putting on iPads, putting on POS solutions that are the lead times or latencies much faster, so that you can serve more customers. So we are looking at the many things in that space.
Is there any tech that you've rolled out that you're particularly proud of?
Look, I think we have rolled out quite a number of features. Obviously, we use Go now, like most of the carriers do. On board, we have iPad solutions. The pilots have been carrying iPads for some time. The cabin crew are now all carrying iPads, the iPad minis, with a good POS solution that enables credit card transactions very seamlessly. And then that also allows the back-end so-called inventory channel management, so that whenever a flight returns, you need to go and stock up. So I think it's just not on the front end, it is also on the back end of processes as well. Yeah.
Do any of you guys sell carbon offsets or something along those lines?
We have done in the past, but the reality is the take-up was very low.
Oh, absolutely.
Very low.
I want to tell you why in the low-fare space, we are very carbon-friendly. I had a conversation just prior to this. I have been in some airlines with brand-new aircraft, the next-gen aircraft, and I've seen load factors of 20%, 30%. Mm-hmm. In our space, you will see load factors north of 80, 85, 90%. And of course, we talked about the CO2 emission per aircraft or per passenger by weight or kilogram. And I think it's a responsible thing the low-fare airlines are doing. In fact, in our group, the Qantas actually has got very high load factors as well. It's all about, it's not only selling carbon efforts, but we have what's called a climate action plan. All right, I put it out there. We will go 10% SAF by 2030, 60% SAF by 2050. These are goals in 2030 and 2050, and then the low-lying fruits are zero wastage, removing plastics. I think we're all talking the same talk here. And with the next-gen aircraft having better fuel efficiency of 1.5% per annum improvements when we refleet into modern fleet. But I also want to bring everyone to the audience and panel here is that you have to be responsible in terms of how you operate a very expensive aircraft filled up to the brim with jet fuel, going into markets. You want them to be near high 80s, 90s load factors, to be carbon responsible. If you know what I mean, Mike. Yeah.
No, I agree. I mean, our LCCs tend to, I mean, their carbon footprint per passenger is going to be lower. In fact, the 459-seat A330neo that you are still to travel on is the lowest carbon footprint per passenger aircraft in the world, period.
All right, so Indigo Partners is part owner of Frontier Airlines in the United States, and Frontier actually uses for advertising America's greenest airline, and they're trying to tell the public exactly this. I don't think anybody cares, and I don't think anybody understands. But I mean, would you ever use this in marketing? Do you think? No.
I've used that phrase a few times. Yeah. The fact that the 330neo is the lowest carbon footprint per passenger in the world. I mean, it is. It absolutely is, and it's generally true of the LCCs in their configuration on a per pax basis is less carbon, and it's exactly the point that Bar is making. But airlines have got to do. We've got to do a number of things along the way. I mean, in terms of our commitment towards a net zero, I don't think it's about going out there and making sort of bland statements. So we're going to do this or do that. I think it's about doing. Or in 2030 we might be this. I think it's doing meaningful things now, and this is things, might be on, the easy things to pick off the tree, like investing in GSE that is electric, these aren't the big polluters compared to, say, the aircraft, but at least you're making a difference now, because the long-term solutions for aircraft is a bit further down the line. SAF is something that we're all investing in, we're all interested in. Cebu Pacific is doing its part without doubt, but it's a long way, it's a long lens before we get there. So in the meantime, we've got to do all that we can. And just going back to Richard's point, passengers buying carbon offsets, it's great. If you did a survey of next gen people, Gen Z or whatever people out there, they'd all go, oh yeah, I'll contribute. But then in reality, when it comes to them making their booking, absolutely nobody does. So it really isn't doing anything whatsoever. So it's about making concrete changes. Airlines can do the low-hanging fruit now, which they must, and they've also, each and every airline has got to be making investments in terms of its intellectual investments, a lot of it is at this point in time, to make sure that further down the line we can deliver something even bigger than the short-term things that we can do at the moment.
We were talking before about the turboprops that you run. There's a company out there that says it's going to build a 19-seat electric aircraft.
Yeah.
You think we'll see this sort of thing flying for an airline in your lifetime?
Well, it depends how long my lifetime is, I guess. I hope a very long time. But no, I think the electric aviation is going to happen. I don't think it's a replacement for the type of aircraft that the three of us are flying around in yet. I don't think it's on the horizon, probably in my aviation career, hopefully in my lifetime. But the big jets, an A320 upwards, I can't see an electrically powered aircraft of that sort of size going a reasonable distance in the next 20 years. That sort of horizon. Maybe it's 15 years. Now, air taxis, I think that's just around the corner. And scaling that up to sort of mid-range, sort of, I don't know, very short haul flying, an hour and a half, maybe up to 100 seats. I think that's in the sort of, 5 to 6 year horizon potentially, probably more like 10 years. But it's intercontinental travel. It's a long, long way away. I mean, the technology is just there. Whether it's hydrogen, ultimately have to be hydrogen. I'm not sure how it can be SAF because there just isn't enough of it. So there's got to be something out there, and I can't see it. I'm not sure anyone has. I not know anyone who's come up with this is the definitive answer, which is why so many people are looking at it, and there are so many different parallel streams of investigation going on because there isn't a slam dunk in this yet.
Thank you. I wanted to switch topics a little bit here and ask you about a specific market that's on my mind. You know, what do you all make of the future of the Hong Kong air market? You know, Danny Lee, who was up here earlier, has written stories about the airport being quieter and people not knowing, you know, what the recovery is going to look like. You think Hong Kong will be back as an airport?
Yeah.
Yeah. To exactly what it was, or?
I hope so.
Yeah.
I think Hong Kong is it's a phenomenal place. It's one of the great cities in the world. I know it's had its issues in. I mean, it had its issues in the run-up to COVID, of course. Pre-COVID, it had some issues. I don't know how much of that will still be there, you know, once we go through the opening post-COVID. But look, we're seeing demand pick up considerably. It's taken a little bit of time, but going into the Easter season, it looks like demand's coming back. It's a great place. Now, whether or not yeah, and this is important for the Cathay Pacifics of this world and everything else. Well, whether or not it will reestablish itself as a hub and a spoke and everything else, I hope so. I hope so that it does. But Singapore obviously has made some great inroads in terms of sort of capturing the space, perhaps in this part of the world, in terms of which is the more important hub. But I think Hong Kong will come back. I think it's too special a city. I really
What do you think, Richard?
So obviously I used to work for Cathay going back in the day. And going back in the day, you know, when we were sort of young executives, we were very gung-ho, and we used to say, you know, we're not expanding fast enough. You know, forget this capacity constraint stuff. We need to grow, we need to grow, we need to grow. And then, you know, you get a few more gray hairs. Definitely Hong Kong will come back at some level. It's a fantastic city. You know, it's got a lot to offer. But the world constantly changes. I think the one question I would now be asking as Cathay, and the landscape is so different to when I was there, is again, you know, how much connecting traffic can I carry? So I think the really important thing for any airline is, you know, I think it was Jack Welch used to say, we only want to be in a business where we can be number one or number two. And that's very true for airlines. You've got to know your market, and you've got to know where you can be number one or number two. And if you're Cathay, you're incredibly important for the business traffic and the financial traffic and everybody who's going to and from Hong Kong. And there's a great business there, and people, like in Singapore, they will pay the premium that they need to for having an aircraft that is based in their quite expensive geographic location. But where it becomes much tougher is that if I want to be the connecting passenger for people going to the US from everywhere in the region, my cost base is way higher than the Philippines or many of the Chinese carriers. And so I think that's the bit that Cathay itself is going to have to balance. They're going to say, how big is my market where I'm number one, which is feeding to and from Hong Kong? And then, you know, obviously there's filler traffic to make sure I keep my 90% load factors and my carbon footprint and all that kind of stuff. But how big's that? What's the equation? So I think that's the challenge for Cathay. How big do they want to be, and how much connecting traffic can they carry profitably? Great.
You know, United Airlines CEO Scott Kirby, who I cover a lot, likes to say, if you're not first, you're last. Bara, what do you think?
Look, I'm bullish on Hong Kong. I think if you look at the hinterland that Hong Kong is connected to, you have to be bullish. And I think it's one of the primary reasons why Qantas returned to Hong Kong. And I think they're investing massively on the premium end, on the leisure, not premium, the premium markets and the business traffic and the first-class customers. They are investing on the lounge in Hong Kong again. So they will do very well with that product. Now, I want to give you a bit of a story on Hong Kong and Jetstar. It's, we tried to set up an affiliate in Hong Kong, and we never got it off the runway. And Jetstar Asia was flying into Hong Kong, and this has nothing to do with COVID. We suspended our flights pre-COVID for economic reasons. Because pre-COVID, Hong Kong and Singapore were competing from hub to hub. Mm-hmm. Each one was trying to take traffic to the hub, and you fly them. And so when you try to do that, that leg becomes very inexpensive or very cheap for customers who loved it. It's a fantastic product, and it didn't make sense for us. We had 95% load factors on Singapore, Hong Kong, but we could make better profits elsewhere because it's stage 9. It's 4+ hours. We could be in under 2 hours, and we make better ask. So, from an economics point, it didn't work for us, but it's a fantastic market. I'm pleased that our group is back there, from Qantas returning back to Hong Kong from Australia, and we'll watch what happens. We'll watch what happens. And obviously, the dynamics of Hong Kong has changed with the political landscape in China and SAR as well. And I think if you look at China Eastern, China Southern, and you look at the Cathay Pacific dynamics, you only have to be bullish on Hong Kong. And I think if I speak to my friends at Cathay, they are very bullish in Singapore. They operate with us. We're going to go to move T4 at the end, Terminal 4. We'll be in Terminal 4 with them in Changi Airport. And they are seeing some incredible load factors on their flights, as far as I understand. Yeah.
Thank you. All right, question for the whole panel, and just go one by one. Richard, on. What do you think is the best run airline in Asia, and why? What airline do you admire?
I'm not sure I can answer that question.
No?
There's too many airlines. They have completely different models, and they know their models better than I do. And frankly, I've had so many issues in Sri Lanka in the last 12 months.
All right.
I've not been looking at all of the other airlines.
Which is the one that you fear competing with the most? And maybe it's not an Asian airline.
So, even that's a question that, we get asked everywhere. Who is your biggest competitor? The reality is that you have a completely different competitor or set of competitors on every route that you fly. I mean, obviously, the biggest competitors for us, where we're geographically located longer term, are probably going to be Indigo and Air India, because India is one country and we fly to 10 destinations there. So that's probably my biggest. The Gulf carriers are huge, but Europe is not my mass destination. I fly to 2 or 3 places there. So yes, they're competitors, but I have a different economic model. I don't have petrodollars behind me or other things. So probably the biggest for me is India. But who's the best run? Sorry, I try and concentrate on my own house at the moment.
All right, Mike. Richard didn't like the question so much, but do you want to give it a shot?
Well, I think if we were to we're in the LCC space. We might be a complicated LCC for the reasons we've talked about. But I think we hold our head up very highly in this part of the world. What I would say, and not trying to avoid the question, but there is one LCC that is without a doubt the best standout LCC in the world, and that's Ryanair. And I think what they've done is they've stuck to the disciplines for, O'Leary's been doing it for 27 years or something, and it's a phenomenal story. So, look, that's where, when I'm sitting down talking with my team, I say, look, that's what brilliant looks like. Now, I think we do a pretty good job. I think we do a very good job, actually, maintaining the disciplines here in a very, very difficult market here in Asia, Southeast Asia. But you want to see world-class, best-run airline for the last 27 years, Ryanair.
What about you, Bara? What do you think?
I want to elevate this to, say, airline group. And it's obviously, for me, it has to be yours. The Qantas and the Jetstar airline group. No, I want to put it out there. It's, I'm saying this from experience. I've been with Jetstar.
Hi, Alan. He's on camera.
Yeah. Many people call me that I'm part of the furniture in Jetstar. I was part of the startup team in Jetstar Asia in 2004. At that stage, I've known Alan Joyce personally. Alan was chief executive of Jetstar Australia, and through his leadership in Jetstar Australia, we went places in this part of the world, and then he has taken the helm at Qantas Airways and Qantas Group, and I've seen the way we emphasize, we put safety front and center in everything we do. Yes, we have to make money, and we are responsible as shareholders. I've seen the focus on the customers. I've seen the way we collaborate and how we have a portfolio of businesses in the group. We just don't only have Jetstar and Qantas International. We have Qantas Domestic, Qantas Freight, Qantas Loyalty, and we have Jetstar of Szücs in Japan, New Zealand. And I've seen how this portfolio focus and how, especially over the last 3 years through COVID, and how resilient we have been. It's credit to the shareholders. I think many of you, I've heard Richard talk about bonds. At a group, we did raise capital. We didn't have money parachuted in our shores. We had to raise capital. We did it the hard way. We owned a lot of aircraft. We then mortgaged the aircraft. We had land. We sold the land to capitalize what we could. And then we really survived very hard on our own. And we really stared deeply, introspected each and every business. And we made the difficult decisions fast. We parked all the aircraft in Asia. We pivoted it into Western Australia, and we were able to cash generate. So, I'm a big fan of the group. I've been with the group for many, many years. And what I've seen in where the group has done over the last 3 years is stand out for me. And if you then project it forward, we are always innovating. If you look at Project Sunrise and Project Winton, we are taking on the 220s in domestic Australia, and we have the range on the 321s, XLRs. And then at the premium end, Qantas has Project Sunrise, the A350-1000 XLRs, and they are pushing the edge of flying. They've launched premium seats, the first and business class, which were just launched last week, and we have a phenomenal price-sensitive product in our group where we also are very customer-centric as well. So I apologize to all of you, but I say my number one vote goes to the Qantas and Jetstar group.
I've never heard such a passionate support of Qantas before, so thank you. Thank you very much to the panel. We are out of time. This was great. Thank you to all of you.
Yeah. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thanks, Richard.
Thanks very much.
Thank you.
Thanks, Barrett.
Okay, thank you.